Welcome to Beyond the Paradigm. I'm Paul Breckel. My special guest today is an author and he's also the host of the Macroaggressions podcast, which is a popular podcast hosted from the United States. My guest is Charlie Robinson, and today's episode is entitled False Flag Operations. If you like this episode, could you first of all click that like button, as it helps the algorithms to make this episode more visible when people are looking for an episode to watch. And also, if you're enjoying topics like this, subscribe to the channel. Charlie Robinson, thank you for joining me once again. Welcome.
Well, thanks for having me back. Let's get weird.
Yeah, absolutely. I've been keeping up to date with your podcast. It is one of my favorite ones.
Oh, thank you.
And I believe you've recently, well, over the last couple of months, you've hosted Anarchapulco, I believe. How did that go?
That was great. That was a real treat for me. I got a chance to interview David Icke from the stage. He was back in the UK. I was on the stage in Mexico in front of a live audience, and he was behind me on the big screen. And I had a microphone, and I was doing a Zoom call with him, reading questions from the audience that they'd given me in advance. And that was how we started off. Day one was the first interview of the day was David Icke like that into a packed crowd. It was amazing. I had a blast. We had earthquakes happening during it, which is kind of normal there for Mexico. We had a great vibe, a lot of nice people, met all kinds of a lot of Canadians that had been escaping Canada recently, like really feeling like they're escaping. Like one guy I know just like left his entire house and just grabbed his dog and everything he could get in his car, and he left because he thought they were coming to get him, and they probably were. So we had an amazing week with some interesting people, and I can't wait to do it again next year. Yeah, it was a treat for me to be able to host and MC the event, because I'd been going there for many years, and this time I actually had a job, so so I was busy. I had stuff going on, so it was a little different, but I still enjoyed myself a great deal and met a lot of nice people, and I'll be back next year, I'm sure.
Good. How many people attend it? I mean, it's quite well attended.
I think there's probably 700 people there and another couple thousand watching online. I don't know. It's hard to tell because it's like an all week event, and people are coming and going all day, all night. It's just like it's like a big festival, and so it's rare that you get everybody in one spot. That was what was nice about the David Icke thing, was that because it was the first event of the first day, everyone was there, to start it off. We just had the introductions, the opening ceremonies, and everyone was ready to party. So we started it off the right way with David Icke, and ended the day with Larken Rose. And actually, I should say we ended the night at Max Egan's bar, far too late into the night, drinking beers and whatnot out there on Max's bar. And it was a great time. And I highly recommend it for people that want to get out and be around some like-minded individuals, and go to Mexico in February, which is a great place to be, and to learn quite a bit. So yeah, I highly recommend it.
Yeah, Canada sounds like a place that people definitely need to get out of, and I'm expecting probably quite a few people starting to leave Scotland with the law they've just passed up there.
Yeah, they might have to.
Scary.
What a joke, man. I mean, this is desperation time. This is the sort of things that governments do when they're losing control. So it's a dangerous time, because they're liable to do just about anything, like criminalize speech and start to call, words hate speech, and life in prison and 7 years in prison, and all these things, social credit scores. I mean, this is not going to work for for us. We're gonna have
No.
to put a stop to this like immediately. I like that the Scottish prime minister, I guess, was opened up the hate, the the I guess the anti-bigotry hate hotline, and everybody reported him for his
Yeah.
tweets where he was calling out white people for this and white people for that, white people for this. So
Yeah.
more of that. We need more of that. More call up and report your prime minister, report your congressman, report your local media personality, report all those people. Then play that game. Then you want to play that game, we'll play the game too. We'll call up and just start putting everybody on your list. So
Oh yeah. Yeah. Just bombard them. Just flood the police with complaints. That's definitely something I'd encourage people to do. Like you said, if
yeah,
they want to play the game, we'll play the game. So I remember reading in your book, The Octopus of Global Control, how you had like a family get together.
yep.
Was it like I don't know whether you
Thanksgiving
said it was
dinner.
Christmas, Thanksgiving. Yeah, we don't have that here. So Thanksgiving dinner, and you brought up this. You got talking about the terrorist attacks in September 11th,
Yep.
and you wasn't prepared for sort of the response that you got. Is
Yeah.
that what propelled you to start doing now what you're doing in the or
It, well, I learned how not to do it
hmm,
from that. That was a real good lesson. I learned that you need to have your argument down to like, you got to really know your stuff. And you also have to know the timing. The timing is important too. Nobody wants
hmm,
to talk about 9/11 at Thanksgiving dinner, especially your in-laws. So you have to know your audience. I made every mistake you can make by doing that. But it's a fun, I mean, part of the thing is that my one of the members of the family that was at the table was like kind of egging me on a little bit, kind of like wanted me to do it because
hmm,
had similar beliefs, as I did. And I sort of made the mistake of of bringing it up, man. It wasn't good, but I still feel like everybody needs to know about 9/11. I just know that if you want people to understand these things, you have to know that there are sometimes are better than others. Some locations and scenarios are better than others. You don't, and also, frankly, you can't lecture people about this stuff. It has to be a conversation. And
hmm,
if somebody isn't ready to participate in the conversation, it's one thing if somebody in your family comes up and asks you a question and you're answering it. It's another thing if like they're just enjoying their Thanksgiving dinner and all of a sudden they're hearing about a third building falling. You know, they're like, "We didn't ask for this. We don't want it." But so you know, I learned some valuable lessons about the delivery of the information and the way in which you can convey it, and that also it's important for you to have some sort of back and forth. If you definitely want to talk about a topic like that, rather than lecturing somebody about it, you could instead just ask them a question and get them, like, hey, what do you think about this? Like, hey, what do you think would explain why a third building fell on 9/11? And they would go, I didn't know a third building fell on 9/11. You go, oh yeah, a third one fell, like two planes, three buildings. Isn't that weird? I mean, what do you attribute the third building falling down to? I don't know. So like if you kind of gauge their level of knowledge and interest and understanding of the event, and you do that by asking questions and by having a conversation, but you don't just say, sit down, let me tell you what 9/11 is, and just go into like an hour long verbal vomiting all over some poor bastard who can't get away from you. Like that's not going to work. That's not a good way to do it. It's disrespectful, your message will automatically get thrown in the trash. And but everyone kind of goes through that at some point. Everyone's done that to somebody in their life. Everybody that knows about 9/11 has done that, has made that mistake. The person's just like, I don't want all this info right now. Thank you. I'm trying to have dessert. I'm trying to have this delicious piece of pie. I don't want to talk about jet fuel.
Yeah, I'm totally in agreement with you about asking the questions, because you can just leave it with them. Then you've sown the seed; they can go away and maybe they might come back again in a few days and go, "Hey, you mentioned that third building." I mean, like when it happened, the day it happened, obviously we're a few hours ahead of you. I remember at the time I think I'd gone back to college, but I had a part-time job, and I remember getting into work in the evening. Well, it was in the afternoon, and some guy saying to me, "Have you seen what those Palestinians have done?" And I'm like, "What?" And that was like the initial sort of introduction for me. It's like the Palestinians have attacked America. And it was like, right. I mean, when you initially seen like the footage, so you see the planes, and obviously there's the Pentagon and all that, and then there's the crashed plane, which I remember at the time looking and thinking, I don't see a plane that's been crashed. I can't see anything. But anyway, what was you like your initial thought when you seen all that?
Well, I can tell you, I remember where I was. I had 3 roommates at the time. We were living at the beach in LA, and we got up that morning. Actually, someone woke me up and they're like, "You need to come up and watch this." And I was like, because it was 6 o'clock in the morning where I was. And I got out of bed and went up there and I was like, like watching the highlight of what had happened with the first tower. And then after, as that was going on, then the second one happened and they cut to that. And I was just stunned. I mean, I didn't know anything back then. I didn't understand the game. I didn't know what was going on. I didn't have any sort of context to make an informed, I didn't have an informed opinion about it at that point. And really it wasn't until, and I didn't even start asking serious questions about it until about 2 years later, when they started trying to convince us that we needed to go in. We had already been bombing Afghanistan, but they convinced us that we needed to go into Iraq. And I was like, why do we need to go into Iraq? And they're like, well, 9/11. And I was like, what do you mean 9/11? And they're like, because, like Saddam Hussein and in 9/11. And so we got to go into Iraq. I'm like, wait a second. You guys never mentioned Saddam Hussein in 9/11 before. What are you talking about? And they're like, well, I mean, there was like a connection. And I was like, no, there wasn't. Well, we got to go into Iraq, and I was like, no, no, this whole story, the whole thing sounds fishy. And then I start to kind of work backwards and I go, and you know what? Afghanistan doesn't make any sense either. I mean, we're bombing Afghanistan back to the Stone Age. They're already in the Bronze Age. Like, what we're gonna, and then you start going, you start asking questions about like, what exactly happened on 9/11? What really went down? And when you start to dig into it, you go, oh, wait a second. This whole cover story, the entire like official narrative of 9/11 is nonsense. It's all lies. And it's obvious in retrospect. And then you start to go like, "Oh my God, I feel stupid for believing the official story for as long as I did. Like, what's the matter with me?" Well, you just didn't know, I didn't know any better. I didn't know to be suspicious, and now I do. Now it's obvious what happened and what didn't happen too. Who was involved and who wasn't involved, and why they said certain group of people were involved in it and why they pretended like a certain group of people had nothing to do with it. So it all makes sense now in retrospect, but at the time I didn't have it figured out. I mean, I was stunned just like everybody. I thought it was horrible and terrible, and I do remember the visuals of people jumping out of the windows. That was awful,
Mm,
awful watching that. Like,
mm,
you just, you know, but when you look back on it now, like, they show that on TV here in the United States all the time. The explosion and all that. They want you to see it. They want you
mm,
to they want that to be normalized. There's certain things that they won't show you on TV here, which is weird, but they'll show you that. They definitely want you to see that and feel a certain way about that. Even though when you're watching that plane blow, crash into it, you're watching, I don't know, 50 people, 100 people pulverized and incinerated in a split second, right?
mm,
And that should be enough to not show it to the general public, but they show it all the time here because they want you to see it. And so 9/11 was this massive psychological operation on top of being an actual false flag event. So it's really sort of the event that keeps on giving in terms of different directions that you can go with it. But at its core, it's just a good old fashioned false flag.
yeah. I mean, it's such a massive event and had global impact. I mean, to the point where I was like you in a way. We look at it and we was like, I didn't know a lot back then. I know I didn't believe them about the passports. I was like, when I first heard that, I was like,
Oh yeah,
really? I mean, that was
yeah.
the first thing that hit me straight away. I'm like, fireproof passports. Why didn't they make the plane out of the same material of the passports then? And you just think, hang on a minute. But it was like it had such a global impact, even to the point where I myself was in Afghanistan. Like, if that wouldn't have happened, like, it's impacted millions of people,
Yeah.
different countries all around the world in different ways. And it's such an important topic still. I mean, so one of the things we hear is that 9/11 was an inside job, but do you think it was an inside job, an outside job, or an inside and outside job?
Inside and outside job too. It's funny you say that. I always uh correct people when they say 9/11 was an inside job. I say inside and outside. Don't forget that because there
Mm,
were external forces. Yeah, it was inside in the sense that many people inside the Bush administration were involved in the planning of it. Project for a New American Century, members of Le Cercle, members of uh, what they would call the Ziocons, the
mm,
Zionist component. Um, so that's the inside into members of the military, armed forces. You see two generals get promoted after 9/11. Wow, that's weird. Biggest failure in security history of our country, and you guys get promoted. Okay. Um, so it was an inside job in that regard. Decisions were made, planes were relocated, but it was an outside job in terms of who was involved in the alleged hijackings and the rigging of the trade centers and the rigging of Building 7 and the missile into the Pentagon. I mean, there's a lot of external forces there as well. So it's a massive operation.
mm,
It's an onion, and the more you dig into it, the more you're mortified at how many people could be involved in something like this. And in fact, that's kind of part of the protection mechanism of it too, is that people just go, no, it's too big of a operation. Somebody would have talked. People talked about it all the time.
mm,
They act like, we act like nobody's talked about 9/11. People talk about 9/11 all the time. There's advanced knowledge of that. Bill Cooper called it out 3 months in advance. He knew it was coming.
mm,
He was dead by the end of the year, of course, but this was not a secret, and it was not an organic event. And 19 Arab hijackers with box cutters didn't do 9/11. That's a story. That's nonsense.
mm.
They accomplished it with Boeing, Honeywell, uninterruptible autopilots. World Trade Center was rigged by the Mossad. It was carried out by members of the Ziocons inside the White House with Israeli intelligence and Pakistani intelligence, Saudi help, Saudi money, Bandar Bush, Bush family, you name it, man. Donald Rumsfeld, Dick Cheney. This is the crew that did 9/11. That's who did it. Not a bunch of Arabs, not Osama bin Laden, who worked for the CIA for 25 years. I mean, he was, of course, the scapegoat, and he was, of course, the boogeyman. He's perfect. He was straight out of central casting for like Islamic boogeyman, right? Except that his family was meeting with the Bush family on the morning of 9/11 in Washington, D.C. on behalf of the Carlyle Group. Isn't that an unusual coincidence that the father of the president of the United States was having a business meeting with the family of Osama bin Laden, the alleged terrorist mastermind of it all, who was just about to destroy the White House and their entire administration. Those families were having a business meeting the morning of 9/11, but I'm sure that's all just a gigantic coincidence. Right. So when you hear hijacker's passport was found blocks from the crime scene, if you can believe that, the answer is no, we can't believe that because it's not true. The whole story isn't true. It's not true. None of it's true. It's a gigantic lie. But the thing is, because it was the first story told, it sticks in everybody's head as the official story. There's some psychological conditioning behind that. Who was the first person to give to say who was the suspect in the UK? It was Ehud Barak in the office of the BBC. In the United States, it was L. Paul Bremer in the office of MSNBC, the guy who went on to Marcia McLennan, CEO, who went on to become the head of the Iraq occupation for the United States in a civilian capacity. Both of them were the first people to say it was Osama bin Laden. L. Paul Bremer conveniently wasn't in the trade centers. He was in the office of MSNBC that morning of September 11th. He was there because he knew he was going to need to be in front of the camera in a couple minutes after his building was under attack. And he knew this because he was involved in the planning of it. It's the same reason why Donald Rumsfeld announced that $2.3 trillion in transactions can't be accounted for on September 10th, 2001, because he knew it would get washed off of the front page of the media the following day because he was planning 9/11. That's why he released it the day before. Again, this isn't a coincidence. This is how it's done. And in retrospect, you look back on this and it's all obvious. You can see all the pieces and you go, oh my God, it's all right there. But at the time, you don't know what you don't know. You don't know what's coming tomorrow. When Rumsfeld make 2.3, you guys lost $2.3 trillion. You're going to have to account for that. Well, he did account for that. You know how he accounted for that? He held a meeting the following day at the Pentagon in an office, the exact location that was struck by a missile. Told everybody to show up that office with all their documents and all their paperwork. They were going to get to the bottom of this missing $2.3 trillion. And then that part of the building just up and exploded and killed everybody there. That's 9/11. That's the reality of 9/11. So, 20 plus years later, most of the people in the US still think 19 Arab hijackers with box cutters did it. I mean, it's embarrassing. It's embarrassing, really.
Yeah. Well, it's definitely embarrassing now in hindsight with everything, with all the documentaries that have been, that have come out, all the people doing podcasts, all the articles that have been written. I mean, it didn't take me long when I was started to think about, obviously, the passport thing, alarm bells ringing straight away. But then the next thing was, right, okay, so the Americans, they're always telling us they're the most powerful country on earth. So how is it then these planes can get hijacked and they can't even scramble just one fighter jet?
No.
And it's like, come on, it's just,
Well, they would have, but they had instructed the fighter jets to be out of the area on a training mission. That's the advanced planning of this. That was the, well, if we do this, there will be a response from the Air Force. Not if the Air Force isn't around. Well, why don't we make sure that they're training in Alaska?
yeah.
Let's make sure that the terrorist response group is having their yearly conference, but make sure it's on the west coast of the United States, not the east coast. So it was at the same time. So these things, when you look back on it, you go, you changed this. Dick Cheney came in and changed this stuff.
Mm.
Why? Seems like a lot of very coincidental that you changed all the stuff that was going to need to be changed before this. B, like what? What a lucky guess. Unless it's not a lucky guess, unless they needed a year. They wrote that paper, Rebuilding America's Defenses, for the PNAC group, Project for a New American Century, the Ziocons inside the Bush administration, absent some catastrophic or catalyzing event like a new Pearl Harbor. They weren't going to be able to achieve their goals without a new Pearl Harbor. They wrote that in September of 2000. September of 2001, they got their new Pearl Harbor. They needed a year to rewire the building from the inside, both in a literal sense, in the sense of Building 7 and the towers, and in a figurative sense in regard to the Pentagon and the White House and how they dealt with things, what the procedures were. If A happens, now instead of B happening, it goes to Z, meaning Dick Cheney's in charge.
Mm.
And now everything falls under his jurisdiction, and he's doing things differently, and he's rescheduled things, and now they've moved the fighter jets out of the way, and now they've moved the counterterrorism group out of the way, and now they've moved this group out of the way. Now they're doing 75 drills all at the same time, simulating the same thing, making it extra confusing. Like, all of this stuff shouldn't happen. None of this stuff should happen unless it's intentional. And when you look at all of it, you just cannot write it off as being a coincidence. You just can't, especially when somebody like Dick Cheney's in charge of it. It'd be one thing if Mother Teresa was in charge of it, and you go, oh, well, maybe she just got all confused and picked the wrong dates or something. But when Dick Cheney is involved and Donald Rumsfeld, and they're changing things around, you can be assured that it is not for the benefit of you, and that they have some sort of plan. And of course, they do have a plan. And of course, they had a plan back in the 70s when they were in the White House, in the Nixon administration. Okay, so they know their way around Washington, D.C., and they know their way around the White House, which is why when they came into power in 2000, they only needed a year, get it all done and get it all set up the way they wanted it. They hurried. They knew they needed an event early, and it needed to be a big one. And that they could then get a blank check to reimagine the Middle East and protect Israel, destabilize any of their enemies, and get in and take out 7 countries in 5 years, ending with Iran. Who would want that done? Israel, of course. Who is behind 9/11? Israel, of course. So this is the plan. It's not hard to understand once you go, oh yeah. Yeah, why would Afghanistan want to attack the United States? Why? I mean,
no reason.
I mean, it's a bold plan we're going to hijack all these planes and do all this. I mean, you've got to have a good reason for it, right? You've got to be financed, and you've got to have the logistics, and you've got to have all this stuff. Who would have the knowledge and opportunity? Would it be a bunch of farmers, a bunch of barefoot yak herders in the mountains of Afghanistan? Or would it be maybe, I don't know, the CIA and the Mossad? Like it's in retrospect, it's obvious what happened. But at the time, boy, I'll tell you, at the time, even if I had known what was going on, there was such a patriotic feeling in the country. Like, we're all together. We're going to go get them. And it's like, well, I hate to be like, I hate to like ruin the party, but who's them? And it was like, uh, Muslims, Muslims. And then they'd pull a Sikh out of a 7-Eleven and beat him up because they didn't know the difference between Sikhs and Muslims. You know what I mean? So it was like this crazed, unhinged, stupid mob that was unleashed upon the world, all fired up and ready to get revenge, but they didn't know who to get revenge against. And a bunch of kids signed up for the military because of that.
Yep, absolutely. I mean, they want you to believe that these people in these other countries, like the Islamic countries, they sat there at home, all concocting these plans to come and attack us. When in reality, they're like me and you. They just want to live their lives. They want to look after their families. They want to earn a living, and these things aren't really on their mind, you know. But they would have us, you know. They demonize them, and that's why, like you said, they got this patriotic feeling all built up, and it's like, yeah, with the stars and stripes, and they're gonna go and bomb them back to the dark ages when basically they were in the dark ages anyway. And
Sad.
it is sad. I mean, for me, like, what's your thoughts regarding the theory with the missile strike on the Pentagon, that it was like a missile from an Israeli sub?
That's what I've heard. That's what I've heard. That's actually also what the remote viewers found.
Hmm.
The guys that said they were never going to remote view 9/11, and then Courtney Brown threw them a curveball, and they did remote view it, and they all saw a sub with a midget missile, midget class missile being launched and shot at the Pentagon off the coast of Maryland, I guess. What that's I mean, but I can't
Hmm.
confirm that, but it was hit by a missile. I mean, it wasn't hit by an airplane. There was no airplane parts. And then, what was weird was that in the aftermath of the cleanup out there that afternoon, you look around, who's out there picking up pieces of metal? Don Rumsfeld
Yeah.
himself.
Hmm.
Surely he could have been used elsewhere. His the best use of the Secretary of Defense's time isn't out there picking up metal off the lawn of the Pentagon. It's probably being in a meeting somewhere deciding whether or not we're going to start firing missiles at some place. But instead, he decides to go out on the grass for a photo op while everybody's frantically trying to call him. He made himself conveniently unavailable. So that is after he called the meeting and called all
Yeah.
those people into their death by scheduling that meeting. He knew what he was doing. This isn't
Yeah.
an accident. This isn't coincidental. At some point, you have to stop attributing this stuff to coincidences. You know what I mean? It's just it keeps happening too many times for it to be coincidental. All
Yeah.
the people that were going to blow the whistle on the missing $2.3 trillion, you just happen to get rid of all of them all at the same time. What a convenient. I guess if you know
Hmm.
where the missile's going, you
Yeah.
just call everybody into that meeting and make sure they're whacked. I mean,
So,
airplane. I mean, the hijacker who pulled a 270-degree corkscrew turn, even though he couldn't fly a Cessna. I mean, something that professionally trained pilots with 30 years of experience couldn't do. This Hani Hanjour magically could fly it. I mean, stop, stop, stop. It's just nonsense.
yeah. It is. It's like even the planes that went into the towers, that like professional pilots were saying they even tried it on simulators, and 9 times out of 10 they missed the tower.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
not
Oh, and
even
you
as
would
hard
think
a move as the Pentagon, but these are professionals.
totally. They say it's harder than you think.
Mm. At the speed as well that they were going at. That's the thing. It was to do with the speed. I
Mhm.
mean, what do you think it was like? Do you think it was drones? Because I've heard that there's people saying, it wasn't even a real plane, it wasn't a drone. But I mean, what I always think about is like these people that were on board these planes, like what did they do with them? Did they replace that plane? What I don't understand that bit, mate. It's like
I
that's
know.
just like what happened there.
I mean, I think that those planes well, I know that those planes are installed with something called a Boeing Honeywell uninterruptible autopilot. The only airline that doesn't have those installed in them is Lufthansa. Everyone else has it installed. That allows somebody to remotely control the airplanes
Hmm.
in the event of an event, a terrorist event. Someone could take over and remotely land the plane or fly it into a building or whatever with a
Hmm.
homing device that was more than likely embedded in those buildings. They had access to the buildings for weeks beforehand.
Hmm.
If you've ever seen the pictures of E-Team, where they darkened out all the windows of the towers and made it spell out E-Team, you'll know who was involved in that. The same group that was involved in dancing on the roof of a van from New Jersey as they watched it, as they were there to document the event, otherwise known as the Dancing Israelis.
Yeah.
So, like, again, like what are we supposed to do about that? We were there to document the event. How did you know there was an event to document?
Hmm. That's it.
Just good luck. You just picked one random day out of all days to document the event. You guys all have ties to Mossad, and you went on Israeli TV and admitted this.
It's
And the
it's
guy
just
who
it's
was in
just mind
charge of
blowing.
Department of Homeland Security was a dual Israeli national in the United States and let them all out of jail without charges and sent them out of the country.
Hmm.
That's 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 amazing, man.
Yeah.
What luck.
Yeah, I mean, this is it. I mean, the fact that if people can still believe the official story, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, if they're that stupid, then they deserve what's coming to them because for me, it's willful ignorance. People are willfully blind because if they accept that the official narrative's a lie, then that means they're going to have to do something about it. And most
Right.
people don't want to.
Right. That's it. That's what it is. It's as long as it's just the establishment narrative telling me the story, it's their fault. As soon as I recognize it's a lie and I don't stand up against it or turn it off, then it becomes their fault and they don't want that. They don't want that responsibility. I know people that say, what difference does it make? What am I going to do? Like, what difference does it make if I know how this works or who is involved in that? Like, it doesn't probably to them. They're probably never going, I mean, not directly at least, until it's too late. I mean, until
Mm.
all their rights have been given away and they're just, you know, a lot of people are just not curious. They also, if they know, then they have to, everything that they think they know about the way the world works changes. And then they have to think about that differently. And that's a big job and they're not up for that and they don't want that. And that's a lot of work. And,
Mm.
there's reasons why people don't want to talk about it or think about it, but I don't really respect them for it.
No.
I understand why they're doing it, but I just don't respect them for it because if you know that these these evil people are out there doing this evil, and you just allow it. You just go, who cares? What am I going to do? I mean, then in some way you're allowing it. You're saying
Yeah.
you're okay with it on some level.
Yeah,
You know,
definitely.
you've got it. That you don't need everybody to realize that there's a problem. You just need you just need a small group of people, and then things
Mm.
change. So that's why I don't respect the people that recognize it and just go, what am I going to do about it? I'm just nobody. Well, I mean, if you get enough nobodies together, then all of a sudden you got a lot of people and you can get things done. But like walking around without a mask on back when people were wearing masks, when you'd go into a grocery store, I'd walk in without a mask and try to, through my own uh non-compliance, inspire other people to remember that they don't have to wear a mask if they don't want to. If they just decide that they're not participating, they can do
Mm.
whatever they want. And so sometimes you just have to kind of lead by example, I suppose.
Yeah, I remember the mask thing, people going into meltdown because I wasn't wearing them, and like people at work, and they were saying, "You're not wearing a mask." And I went, "Yeah, well, what do I need to wear one for?" Well, there's a global pandemic. I went, "What? A deadly virus that we need to be told that we've got it? It's that deadly." And in fact,
Right.
one of the symptoms, he's not having any symptoms. Come on.
Oh boy, isn't that convenient? I mean, it's that's the level. They almost have to make the lie so preposterous that if you believe it, they know they've got you, because you're going
Yeah.
to look back on it in retrospect and go,
Mm.
God, I believe that. That's crazy. That, oh, stand on the dot. You got to stand on this dot. You can't, and you got to go this direction down the grocery store aisle.
Mm.
Only that direction only. I mean, if you did that because the tape on the floor told you to, you're a moron. You know what I mean? Like there, you're a simpleton who can't
Yeah.
figure it out. You should be ashamed of yourself for doing
Mm.
those things. Um, like snap out of it.
Yeah.
Boy,
The
I'll tell you, it was fascinating to as a writer. Oh my God, I couldn't. It was like an embarrassment of riches. The amount of topics that I had to write about. I'd go out to the world and walk around and see things I never thought I'd see, like people wearing masks in their cars by themselves,
Oh
and
yeah.
people wearing masks while they're outside walking their dog all by themselves out in here. I'm in the mountains, where it's nice and
Yeah.
air is super clean, and I would see this and just go, God, I mean, these people are broken,
Mm.
broken.
Yeah, I
How
mean,
does
where I live in a coastal area, but I live just about a mile and a half from the beach, and I've got like mountains where I am now, and one of them's literally right at the side of my house now where I live. There's various ways up to it, and I remember being on top, and it's at the back of it, it's like it's level and it's wide open, and I see this woman coming down towards me with her children, and it's what with it out in the wide open spaces, and I hear her from like 100 yards away, social distancing, shouting at the children, "Watch social distancing!" Having an absolute meltdown because there's this one other person in this vast area walking towards them, and it was like, "Oh, come on, please, you're not being serious." And like, I mean, the insanity.
broke them? It broke people. And
Absolutely.
those people are Yuri Bezmenov talks about this. He talks about this ideological subversion and how you can there's a 4-step process to it. But step 3 is that you need to have a crisis, and it has to last 6 weeks or longer. And if it does, then after that, the 4th stage and the final stage is normalization. It's where you just sort of normalize all the crazy behavior that was happening or that was put into place during the crisis situation. And so that's where you get a lot of this COVID stuff being like normalized, that where you have people wearing masks still, and you have people
Yeah.
that are getting booster shots still, and doing all of that. And what he said was that once you subject them to 6 weeks of this intensive fear, that after that point, he said, I could shower them with authentic information, proving the opposite, that things weren't as bad as I said they were. He said it wouldn't matter, that they're permanently broken, and that there's nothing you can do to fix them.
Wow. Yeah, I know quite a few people like that for definite, and there's nothing you can say. We just don't say anything to them anymore. It's just literally pointless.
Good luck to you guys.
Switching
I hope you
gears
make
a
it.
little bit. This ship that hit this bridge in Baltimore, what's your thoughts on that? Because my initial thought, as soon as I watched it, see these lights go out, and then it does this sharp turn to starboard, and then hits this bridge, and I'm thinking, and where are the tugboats? I mean, I live near the coast, so I know about all that. Where are the tugs?
I don't know enough about what the protocol is for the boats going in and out of there. My assumption is that this is just cheap owners putting low quality people in positions that they shouldn't be in, and maybe cutting some corners and putting some dumb fucks out there that don't know how to steer a boat correctly. I I I know it's a very inconvenient location for this to happen, and it really screws things up from a logistics standpoint. And it definitely sounds like something the government would be behind doing. I just don't know. I don't know on this one. I don't know. This might just be good old fashioned incompetence, forced incompetence. Like we're cutting corners because we're a big shipping company, and we've got a bunch of ships, and we want to hire a bunch of unqualified people from India, a drunken Ukrainian captain probably, and put him there because he's cheap, and we have insurance if anything goes wrong, but we didn't think he'd hit the center of this thing and take the whole bridge down. So I am going to attribute it to uh, incompetence. I might be wrong on that. It might turn out to be more intentional, but I'm gonna give them the benefit of the doubt on this one and say, because there's tons of incompetence to go around, and the American infrastructure is not well built either. So something like that is kind of bound to happen at some point. Our trains keep derailing anyway, just in under the best of circumstances, not just, bridges, but our infrastructure is a mess. So if it wasn't this bridge getting hit by this boat, it'll be some other bridge getting hit by something else, because I put that in the second book I wrote. We did a whole extensive chapter on the infrastructure of the United States, and it's a mess. It's terrible. It's embarrassingly terrible. It's like, you would think before we sent $100 billion to Ukraine, we would fix our own infrastructure first, but you would be wrong, because our infrastructure is probably worse than Ukraine's. And but it's not very glamorous to talk about fixing the infrastructure, so it never gets addressed. But this is just kind of like just another thing. I don't know. We'll see what happens. I could be wrong on this one.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of incompetence to go around. That's for certain. There's plenty of it over here. One of the false flags I remember was the 7-7, and I do call this a false flag, and a lot of people 7-7. I mean, I remember like,
well, it was
we had this
100%
crisis. Oh yeah, crisis management
Yeah.
company at the time was Visor Consultants, a guy called Peter Power, and it basically admitted they was doing these rehearsals that were based exactly. Yeah,
He admitted it twice, and I put both quotes in my octopus book. Yep.
It's just because it was. I think it was the Manchester Evening News where he revealed that they've been, managing this terror rehearsal, which is based on simultaneous bombs going off at the precise railway stations and at Tavistock Square. And the thing is with this, I mean, I know from my time in the army that we used to run casualty simulations, and they are realistic. They
Yeah.
have to be realistic. I mean, you're talking you'll be doing a patrol, you're walking into a casualty simulation, you don't know what's going to happen. An IED will go off. I mean, there's people with stomachs hanging out, blood pulsating. And I've said to people before, listen, a lot of these that are going on, like I know from the the Boston Marathon bombing,
Yeah.
they had guys there who were amputees from the Iraq War,
Yeah.
strapped, with in wheelchairs, like,
Yep.
and sat bolt upright, but like with a leg missing. And I've said to people, like, listen, they use casualty sims, they use these crisis sectors. I've done it in the army. I mean, so there's a course in the army where they train people to do the makeup and everything, because you can't always get professional film crews when you're doing casualty simulations. So they have to be quite highly trained at doing it. I mean, so it's not just in America that these things are going on. I mean, there's the Ariana Grande concert as well. I've been looking into that, and that's, again, I mean, I've seen footage from apparently when this bomb's gone off, and they're walking round and some guy's shouting for his daughter, and it's so fake, and it's just so fake.
This is well, with the 7/7 bombing, Peter Power was on BBC One and BBC Five, I think, during the course of the day, giving interviews about this. And he was saying what you said, that they were there to role play an event of a train getting bombed at two different locations. And while they were out there role playing the event of a train getting bombed in two different locations, and actual bombing happened in a train station at two locations at the exact same time on the exact same day, simulating went off the exact same way that they were simulating, but it wasn't them. Like he said that multiple times. He wasn't taken out of context. He wasn't misquoted. He wasn't in a state of panic. He gave the same interview twice. So there's no discrepancy. His company was there on site to do a role play exercise about a train station blowing up, and then a train station blew up exactly the way they role played it. I'm sorry. You can call me a conspiracy theorist if you'd like, but I have questions about that. That is statistically impossible to happen.
Yeah. It's
and
like the
like
boss.
you said, that there are companies that do that.
Yeah.
And listen, to be fair, there's nothing inherently wrong about practicing for a mass casualty event. In fact, you probably should practice that if you're in the services that do that sort of thing. You should train for that. Where I have a problem is when you pretend like it's real when it's not. Like the Boston bombing. Boston bombing I did an entire chapter on that in the Octopus book, and just took a shotgun to that story. That story is so fake. It's so fake. I'm embarrassed on their behalf. Like the people that put the Boston bombing together. It's like, I hope they all got fired, because they made a lot of mistakes, including the guy on the loudspeaker that's going over and over again. This is a drill. This is a drill. This is a drill. And you've got video of it where you can hear it going off in the back,
Wow.
I don't know. So when the thing is, you can do those events, you can run those false flags, but when you get caught, like Boston, you're never allowed to. You're going to be under the microscope from then on out. From those people that know anything that happens, the default is switched to, I bet you the government was involved in it.
Mm.
And the reason why they think that is because they know the government was involved in the Boston bombing. So when you know that they're busted doing that once, it's reasonable to assume that the next time it happens, it's probably going to be them too, or at least it's worth taking a look at, right?
Mm.
So that's why the FBI, whenever anything happens in the US now that has to do with domestic white supremacy, my first instinct is FBI.
Mm.
FBI was involved in doing it, being the bad guys. That's my default setting every time. And the reason is because they keep doing that stuff. So,
Yeah.
and at some point you have to just go, this is how it's done. They say it's somebody else, but it's actually them. They've been
Yeah.
doing it for since the end of World War II. We've
Mm.
been doing it that way.
I mean, the 7/7 ones were poor effort as well, because they tried to tell us these particular guys did it, these Muslims, but the train they told us they were on was cancelled, and the train
Correct.
after it was cancelled. So they couldn't have got there in time anyway. And not only that, when you look at the bus that was ripped open at the top, there's people stood up in it with no injuries. And I mean, come on, that's
And it
poor.
and it happened at Tavistock at the
It's,
Tavistock
yeah,
exit,
yeah. It's
which
just
which is,
oh,
it's a little wink and a nod to
mm,
us, I think, from them.
yeah, I think so.
You
So,
know,
so you, I know Acapulco, you interviewed Whitney Webb, and she was talking to you about Killware,
yeah,
which basically I believe is cyber attacks designed to cause sort of harm to communities.
yeah.
Do you think there's going to be a false flag cyber attack?
Well, Whitney and I talked about this before the 2020 elections too, where she was telling me that they were doing role play simulations where there were cyber attacks on water treatment facilities and also hijacking the self-driving options of
Mm.
Teslas and driving them into crowds of people that were standing in line waiting to vote on election day. They role played that event for some reason in 2020 before the election. So
Wow.
but so we were talking about that, and none of that wound up happening, right? The water treatment facilities weren't hacked and the power grids weren't shut down, but they role played that. So it comes back around this time for 2024. Same people are involved, and Whitney's talking about that Killware software that basically targets things that will impact communities in general, like the water treatment facilities and the power grid and the communications grid and all of that stuff. So it's pretty scary. And that these people are interested in creating chaos. So I think that instead of hijacking airplanes and flying them into buildings, you can just use a cyber attack, blame it on whoever you want: Iran, North Korea, China, Russia. Do something horrible to your own people to create this massive fear, and then grab more power under an emergency declaration and never give it back. So
Mm.
all these things work for authoritarian governments, especially ones that are about to get voted out of office, like the Biden regime. So, that is something it's like, expect the unexpected. Do I think something like that will happen? No, but I am also expecting the unexpected. So because of that,
Mm.
I'm keeping it as a possibility. And when I talked to Whitney about that, and she's saying, listen, I mean, Killware is a thing. It's these guys have figured it out. It's just a matter of when they want to deploy it. It's not if they can do it. They can do it.
Mm.
They can shut it all down. So when do you pull that card out? What do you use it on? What's the desired response that you want from that? How does that work to advance your agenda? And and so that's sort of the future of technology, unfortunately.
Yeah, I've been thinking about it a lot, and especially like crashing the banks. That's something that's been in the back of my mind for a while. Like, I mean, I don't like I pay cash if I can pay cash. I pay cash. If it's somewhere that takes card only, I don't even use their services because I'm trying to keep. I'm one guy, but I tell people just use cash because eventually there's going to be they're going to do something to the banks.
Yeah, I think I think people need to reevaluate the relationship that they have with their banks. They need to remember, at least here in the US, if you have money in a bank account, it's not your bank account. It's technically the bank's. And so you're an unsecured creditor of that bank. And when they want to take the money, they can take the money. But just to be on the safe side, they passed a law recently for a bank bail-in, and that
Yeah.
allows the banks to take the money that's in the bank account and keep it if they find themselves a bit insolvent, meaning they can take the money out of your bank account and keep it legally. Now, they could have
Mm.
always done that because when you open your bank account, you fill out this documentation and it says that, but it's kind of buried in there and nobody really knows about it. But just to make sure there's no discrepancies here, they went ahead and passed this bank bail-in legislation recently, and what that did is it just made it so that they can take the money whenever they want. And so my thinking is, you don't go through the trouble of passing that legislation unless you intend to use it at some
Mm.
point, right? So I'm
Yeah.
assuming, since they did that, that they're going to take your money at some point.
Well, they did
So
it in
plan
Cyprus,
accordingly.
didn't they? It happened in
They did it in
Cyprus. They did
Cyprus.
it.
Yeah, they did in 2014. Yep, absolutely. They took anything above 100,000 euros or something like that. They took like a certain percentage of a haircut, and they just and they're like, well, what do you want? It's just Russian mob money anyway. Well, I mean, if you can do it in Cyprus, you can do it. You can do it elsewhere. They tried it out. It worked. Nobody got
Mm.
hung in the streets. So, you know,
Yeah.
here we
I,
go.
I tell people all the time, if it's not in your hands, it doesn't belong to you. Simple
But
as.
it's
Get a
it,
safe.
yeah,
Get a
if
safe.
just be paranoid.
Mm.
Get some gold, get some silver, get some cash
Yeah.
out of the bank. I mean, already you can see that there's a big problem with cash. They treat it like, you're up to no good. They ask you a bunch of questions when you want to get it out of your bank account, things like that. Like they view cash as like an anarchist tool.
Mm.
As somebody that spoke at the world's largest anarchist conference, of course, I appreciate that, right? But even then, cash is trash because it's U.S. Federal Reserve notes. So it's not the most punk rock thing you can do to have cash. Definitely spending your Federal Reserve notes in our case, um, in a cash system is better than doing it with credit cards. But ultimately, um, getting out of that system before it implodes on itself,
Mm.
getting into something tangible like gold and silver or Bitcoin or Monero or things like that. People, land, physical land. That's a
Mm.
nice thing to have. People are starting to look for some options to you know, get their savings out of the banks because they're like, I don't think these banks are going to be around much longer. Well, I mean, the whole country's completely insolvent. Like we're broke,
Mm.
massively broke. We're only not experiencing a catastrophe because the rest of the world hasn't figured it out yet, but we're broke. That's a huge problem. So
Mm.
people are going to want something that has value. So you got to figure out what that is around you and get it, because paper, paper bills at some point ain't even going to cut it,
Yeah.
unfortunately.
I concur with you about the gold, silver, them sort of things. Got to be tangible, definitely. Well,
Gotta love
Charlie,
that.
it's been brilliant talking to you again.
Thanks
Just
for having me.
before you go, could you tell people about where, because I know you've got a new website and everything, tell people like what you're up to and where they can listen to you and everything.
Yeah. Macroaggressions.io is the brand new website. You can check that out and find everything about the show and the books. And I am working on getting the audiobook out for The Octopus. It is currently in review with Audible right now and Spotify. So it ought to be out in the next couple of weeks, and that'll be good for people to check out if there's somebody that likes to listen to it instead of read it. Give you an option to do that. And you can follow me on Twitter, X, at Macroaggression. That's a good place to find me. Thanks for having me back, Paul.
No, it's been brilliant, Charlie. It's I'd definitely encourage people to listen to your podcast like I always listen to it. And I said it last time when you was on, it's information packed. Charlie does his research and he has some brilliant guests on there as well. So thanks very much, Charlie, for your time.
Thank you.
I'll be back next week, guys, with a new guest. I'm Paul, and this is Beyond the Paradigm.